but from a perspective of taking the live inflation out, we would need to see roughly a $3,000 price on gold for it to be truly equal to the 850 high established January 21st, 1980.
Hey everyone, you are watching the Miles Franklin Market Update. I'm your host, Elijah K. Johnson, and with us today, one of the top silver experts, David Morgan. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, Elijah, it's always good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Definitely, it's great to be with you. And first, I'd love to just talk about the precious metal markets because it's been a roller coaster ride for a lot of us. Especially for silver, as usual, it's usually a roller coaster for silver. But back in March, we saw a low for silver just below $12. And in August, this month, we've seen it go all the way up to right above $29. So way more than a doubling, maybe 2.5 times. And so a lot of people are like, what is going on right now? Gold has hit all-time highs. It's been above 2,000. We've seen a bit of consolidation since those two run-ups. But yeah, what is your take on what is happening with precious metals right now?
Well, gold is both the metals have caught fire, and relative looking at the gold-silver ratio, which talk about almost every interview I do. Silver's outperforming gold now, but before it started to do that, it hit a all-time record high on the gold-silver ratio, meaning it was like roughly 125 to 1. The first time in all recorded history it's been that high. And from that point until this interview, it's gotten down into about the 70 ratio, so obviously outperformed gold in that time frame. And there is a run to gold starting. I believe I've said this for years that as the financial system continues to have further stress, and really the basic as you can be is lack of trust or faith in not only the currency, but the governments behind them, the banks as well, people go to safety. I mean, Turkey has basically seen this run to gold very recently where people are selling their cars, stuff that they don't need, and getting out of the lira, moving into gold in a substantive way. And that's just one rather small country relative to other country sizes around the world. So that's just kind of an inkling, I think, of what's going to be happening over the next few years, or perhaps faster. I've really seen an acceleration in the markets, as we all can see. It's clear. It doesn't take anybody special knowledge to see how quickly silver's gone into a parabolic mode. And the only thing I'm not correcting you, you're accurate, everything you said. I just want to point out that the nominal high in gold is a fact, but from a perspective of taking the live inflation out, we would need to see roughly a $3,000 price on gold for it to be truly equal to the 850 high established January 21st, 1980.
Yeah, that's a really good point regarding the inflation-adjusted gold and silver prices. People have different numbers for that. How did you come to the conclusion that it's about 3,000 for gold?
Well, that's what you get if you use the inflation calculator from the Fed, which of course is extremely inaccurate as far as I'm concerned, because from about 1980, they changed the metrics. They took food and energy out of the inflation to CPI. So if you use their metrics, it's about that number. And if you use somebody that uses the same standard that we used in 1980, which I believe is far more truthful, where you put food and energy into the equation for the CPI, you come out with a much bigger number. You come out in, several $1,000s for an ounce of gold, equal to the 850 purchasing power of 1980. So immediately what you want to add, you don't really want the number so much. It gives you a flavor for how much printing's gone on, but what you really want to ask yourself is 1 ounce of gold buys this on a weighted average over time. In other words, the price of gold is undervalued, fair valued, or overvalued throughout history, but most of the time it's really a solid um, monetary value that's actually pretty stable. It does fluctuate, as I just said. I hope I'm not confusing anyone, but the point being is that right now it's very undervalued relative to the amount of goods and services that have been out there in the marketplace that have been produced by really malinvestment by the banks pumping money into the system, and people don't know where to go or what to do with it, getting false signals basically, and they get a huge distortion in economic activity because of that. And at the end of the end, when we get near the end and people wake up, enough people wake up to what's happening, there's this, as I call it, run to gold, which, as I just said a moment ago, Turkey is a perfect example of the lira going down, 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 and these people was trying to do everything they can to get out of the lira and move into gold or dollars. There's still, there'll be a lot of faith in the U.S. dollar until the very, very end.
Definitely. No, the interesting thing is you're kind of pointing out that, yeah, the inflation adjusted high for gold is, even higher than it is today, even if you use the official numbers. So that's a kind of interesting point, because we see this COVID situation, the government stimulus, all these different factors that are probably propelling precious metals higher. So it's kind of like that's just kind of been the catalyst for precious metals to find their true value. Would you say that that's kind of correct?
I would agree. I mean, right now it's as much a psychological phenomenon as anything. I mean, markets, everyone, I'm pretty high in math, whatever that means. But I always thought early in my life that, with the right, math background, hard study, finding out what the PE ratios are and what the projected earnings are, and some of that still has merit. But for the most part, markets run on psychology. It's fear or greed. And once I got that into my brain, I started to do better in the markets because, there aren't logical reasons why one soda that's basically sugar water with syrup in a red can sells for more with soda water with syrup in a blue can, but it does. And it's the same thing in the mining industry. There's certain miners that I can tell you are overvalued relative to their peers, but they always do better than the other ones. So why not be on the one that does if I'm here to help people make money in the sector, I'm going to pick the one that I know or, believe strongly is going to outperform. And is it logical? It is not. But I don't need logic to pick the right one. In most cases, there are, I'm trying to be consistent here, and it's tough because, sometimes the best thing you can do is be a value investor and discover all the things I mentioned. But if you don't account for psychology, then you're not getting the total picture. I think that's the best way to say it.
With respect to the silver price, inflation adjusted, where would that be?
I forget what the CPI number is. I think it's around 120, but that's a stab or a guess. But as far as the shadowstats.com is concerned, with the CPI metrics of 1980 at 600 an ounce. So, that shows you by using that metric. I mean, I'm not saying it should be 600. I'm saying it's getting to 600. All I'm saying is the truth is, if you use the same CPI numbers used in 1980 till now, from 1980 to 2020, so 40 years, $50 in 1980 is $600 today. That's what I'm saying. And so that shows you how undervalued silver is relative to where it was in 1980. If you use the official numbers, Elijah, I can't remember, I think it's about 120. Remember, I predicted silver would get to $100 in like 2003 when it was oscillating between $4 and $6 until it broke out after above 555. And of course, you think about that, I'm saying there's a 20-fold increase in the price of silver. And, that may be low after this thing, really gets going. I don't know. Markets know more than me. I'm very willing to admit that. But what I do know is there's been a lot of price suppression in the metals markets, particularly in the silver market.
Now, with respect to silver, what you've also been recently reporting regarding the COVID situation and the mining sector. How has all the coronavirus, regulations and all that impacted the supply of silver?
Substantially on a month-to-month basis. I did an article or a video blog, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, that the overall silver supply decreased 66%, But again, that was for a month. It's not for the entire year. But you got to remember, since silver is a byproduct mineral in 70% of the cases. So if you shut down a zinc mine, a lead mine, a copper mine, or even a gold mine, you're affecting the amount of silver coming out of the ground. And then, of course, your primary silver mines, like Pan American, that has several, they lost their production in Chile and Peru and Mexico, part of it. And so now they're back online. So right now, I'm going to stab at it. I haven't actually looked at the numbers for a while, but probably around 25, 30% still. And the other part that no one talks about, and I think is really kind of part of the move for the price increase, is the recycling supply chain. Even though most people seem to believe that silver isn't recycled at all, it is recycled, not to maximum efficiency. A lot of it still ends up in landfills, but there's roughly 165 to 180 million ounces of silver recycled every year. And that supply chain is sort of I'll call it best kept secret, unless you're kind of an industry insider and you know that you're going to get stuff from the recycling facilities into your jewelry store. You're fabricating a lot of your industrial uses with wire and mesh and shot and extruded materials and wire and all the thing that goes into the silver market from the industrial side. Well, if that supply chain is broken down, now you've got to go into the marketplace and you've got to buy, raw silver off the exchange or wherever you could get it. So that's having an effect as far as I can determine. I don't want to make a big case out of it because some of it's anecdotal, some of it's direct, but I don't have like a huge database where I've got massive confirmation on what I just said. I don't want to mislead anyone.
What does the silver supply, like above ground right now, look like?
It's fairly tight. I mean, it's such a small market. I mean, you could go from a paper price of 12, which is ridiculous, and there are probably only 2 or 3 paper trades. No one bought silver at $12 other than on paper. So maybe somebody's able to get a futures delivery for $12 silver, but you're only going to get 1 or 2 contracts. Trust me on that statement. There's not a lot that was bought at that price, but it did hit it. But this is stuff that the public is unaware of if they don't understand how markets actually move and how markets are actually comprised. But regardless, we've seen pretty good tightness in the markets, huge flow into the ETFs primarily and the retail side. So both the retail investors and the, let's say, more sophisticated or institutional side are moving into the silver market at the same time. And then just to reiterate what I said a moment ago, you also still have industrial demand. I mean, whether or not this COVID affects the amount of demand on the industrial side, it does. But you still have a need for it. And especially if you consider the paradigm that we're in, Elijah. For example, think about how many people want to move out of the city and get out in the country and maybe use some solar panels so they're more energy independent. Well, solar uses silver. And so in the electric vehicle market, I don't want to depend on the oil system. I want to, charge my car off my solar panels. So that uses more silver. So there's a lot of things in the pipeline, even in a economic contraction or let's say a reset where things are changing rapidly and there's new paradigms. I don't want to use the word paradigm, it's overused. But the situation of economic activity has changed. I mean, you've gone where, like, for example, a lot of restaurants and retail stores are out of business. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. I know you have another question. But that's the idea, that even though you might hear it from the mainstream, that demand is decreased, you get the idea it's going to decrease like to zero or something. It's not true. And I could build a case that you actually have pretty much constant demand, not in specific areas, but overall demand, because of solar is one really good example.
Definitely. And as we've seen this recent run up with precious metals, we've seen silver outperforming gold, the gold silver ratio decreasing. Do you think that will continue as we move forward?
It will. I think we're going to establish a trading range here. In fact, we've probably already begun it. So I'm looking, and everyone knows I could be wrong, and I usually admit it promptly. But I think we're going to establish a trading range. I really expect that range to be somewhere in the 24, 23, I don't know, to 30-ish range. I think we're going to move around. It could be as high as like 25 to 30. Could be as low as 21, 20, even to 25. I don't think you're going to see that. But, markets, again, the more than I do, and we don't know where the satisfaction is. I mean, have the institutional investors say, okay, I got enough silver. We've got, X percent in our portfolio. We were lucky enough to buy it, below 22. We're going to hold it for a while. The retail market sort of says, well, I've got enough silver. And now the demand starts to wane from those two sources, and now all you have is the normal trading activity volume-wise, coupled with perhaps somewhat decreased industrial demand. And so now you're going to see that reflected in the price. Now, before I get a bunch of, or you get a bunch of comments, David said, what? I'm saying that even though these markets are manipulated, there is times where the market is, I'll call it quiet, where the day-to-day trading activity is fairly reflective of the ebb and flow of the market. Now, it's always got this overhang of paper that can affect the price drastically at any time, but it doesn't do it every single day in a manner that would be able to be detected by, let's say, an algorithm looking for Sharpe's ratio, like I wrote about in the Silver Manifesto. And people, what's that? You can read the book, you can buy it, it's back available, but it's basically showing how much of a random walk a market is, if it's truly free or not. And if the Sharpe's ratio comes out a certain level, it's proof beyond a shadow of a doubt that the market's manipulated, which is what I show in the book. I have a whole chapter about that.
Now, before we let you go, I wanted to discuss briefly the economy. We've seen, a big contraction in the economy, obviously, because things were shut down and everything like that, because of the COVID situation. Some people have talked about a V-shaped recovery and stuff like that. What is your perspective on where the economy is going to move going forward?
Yeah, great question. This is my take. I mean, I just read Yahoo Finance this morning, and they're pretty rosy pictured. It's recovered better than expected, and it is a V-shape. Look at the stock market. The stock market's a V-shaped recovery. Well, the stock market's part of the economic establishment and is really manipulated, like most other asset markets. I'm fearful. I look at the real economy, the physical economy. What do we need in the real world? Communication, energy, and food. And people need to live somewhere. So with this drastic amount of unemployment, not only in America, but around the globe, people that can't afford rent, where are they going to go? Are they going to be homeless? So that's a big need of humanity. Food is contracting rapidly due to the flooding in China, flooding in the breadbasket of the United States, crop failures, this locust situation, and on and on. And that's going to establish a new mindset, I think, around the globe where, food will be attributed to inflation, although it's going to be both inflation, but primarily it's going to be a supply issue. But people won't think through it that far. It doesn't really matter. All they know is they got to pay more for food, and it's harder to get food on their plate. In fact, China, I guess, has implemented a new policy that if you're in a restaurant, you have to order one plate less than the people at the table. So if there's 8 people sitting down, you can only order 7 plates of food. So, I mean, this thing is going to manifest. So that's number 1 is shelter. Number 2 is food. And number 3 would be, how do you make money? If you can't get a job, and you're whatever age, but especially if you're, 50 or older, it's harder in the workplace because you usually paid more. You're paid for your experience, but if your experience is like, someone really experienced in the restaurant business, maybe at a chef level or maitre d' level or whatever, if you get your job back at all, consider yourself lucky, and you might be out because someone younger that will work for less is going to take your old job. So I'm very fearful about it. I want to be Pollyanna doomer, gloomer, but I am a realist. I want to paint a real accurate picture. So food is critical, jobs are critical, shelter is critical. And I really think that this is going to impact us much more than, let's say, Yahoo Finance is projecting. Just because pieces of paper are worth more because other pieces of paper have been printed. So stock certificates are worth more because more money has come through from the printing that the government's borrowed from the private bank Federal Reserve, just because that's taken place. And of course, all the financial heads are taught to point and yell, oh, look at the stock market. That's not the physical economy. The physical economy is breaking down. And so I'm afraid for my fellow citizens and global citizens that there are some really, really tough times ahead, Elijah. That's how I see it. You asked, I'll tell you.
You mentioned briefly about inflation. I was interested in learning or hearing a bit about your perspective on how you think the stimulus and the increase of the base money supply. We've seen over $1 trillion increase of the base money supply this year. Will that impact prices? Will that kind of flow into the real economy and cause higher inflation?
Yeah, it's a two-part answer. I mean, basically, especially being Austrian schooled, that, you can't have both, but you can. That's why they came up with the word stagflation. So anything that's on leverage, which means a loan. So if you're a real estate, auto loan, school loan, all those things will devalue. So you'll see, for the most part, I'm speaking with a broad brush here, but you see real estate, especially commercial real estate. I mean, think about the amount of malls that are closing in America. I mean, it used to be malls were like you have a waiting list for a store to get a space in the mall if somebody moved out or whatever. But now they're like ghost towns. So that's part of the commercial real estate industry. And then you've got, of course, rentals. So you've got all these, apartments of, from a duplex to a fourplex to multi-units, and you're not getting your rent payment. So if you're not getting your rent payment, might not be making your mortgage payment. So there's a chain reaction there. So anything with a loan is going to deflate for the most part. And then anything that's needed, like food and gas and your cell phone, energy, is probably going to increase. I am well aware of the oil price currently, but it takes oil to make food and blah, 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 blah. So I think you're going to see energy actually start increasing, not real near term, but over the next couple of years or so. So it's a mixed bag. You're going to see deflation in some areas. You're going to see inflation in the things that you need. Not so much maybe the clothing sector here in the U.S., and maybe not globally. Food for sure, housing down. So it won't balance. You see this greater distortion in who's getting richer during this extreme hardship for most people.
Definitely. And obviously, some people believe that purchasing precious metals and investing in them are a way to kind of protect against that. What is your perspective on ways that, the average person can protect against this coming inflation and economic hardship that, I guess we really have been experiencing for the last 5 months?
Yeah, well, number one for most people, just buy more food. Cut back anything that you can. If you're used to, taking family out to eat, every 2 weeks or every month, you might consider stopping that. Of course, that's kind of going away anyhow. So you just kind of tighten up your budget, live within your means as much as possible, pay off any debt that you can, and do an inventory. I mean, if you basically aren't working and you're not, and you've got 2 cars, you might consider selling one of them. Definitely, I would say purchase more food. If you're beyond that, you have savings and you're looking at, your 10 grand in the bank or 25,000 or 50 or whatever it is, the best way to exit the banking system is don't go to the bank and ask for greenbacks. They're going to give you a bunch of hassle. If you ask for more than 10,000 of your money back, you're going to have to fill out a couple forms and probably give them a thumbprint. So the best thing to do is, go to someone like Miles Franklin or a well-established dealer that's well recognized and pay. So write a check for precious metals and put your savings, some of it, I'm not saying all of it, but some of it in the precious metals. Now you have money that's lasted for eons, millennia, thousands of years. And that's a protection for your savings. But in order to make that move from fiat to precious metals, you have to have savings. And honestly, a lot of people don't. So what you need to save in is something that's the most valuable. And literally, that's food. I will perhaps put out on my free list some storable food, but I don't want to get, I worry a little bit about my reputation. I mean, I like to be, a good human and serve others, but, it's hard to find much storage food out there that you could get in people's hands in less than like 45 days. And a lot of people, don't want to wait that long.
David Morgan, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we let you go, did you want to share with the viewers where they can find you and any last thoughts you had?
Thank you, Elijah. Yeah, I think the best thing is to go to themorganreport.com and get on our free newsletter. When you're on there, explore the website a little bit. If you go over to the blog, I think that's really useful. It's public information. I spent a lot of time for free. I don't get paid for it to do interviews like this. Occasionally write an article. So those are all available for free on the blog. And then if you're so inclined, when you're on the blog page at the very top, there's like a navigation bar that shows our Twitter feed, our LinkedIn presence, our YouTube presence, and I think there's even a corporate Facebook account on there. So you could jump from the blog page to any of those other social media type platforms. And lastly, if you're so inclined and you're looking to leverage your precious metals investments after you've established a core position in physical metal, you might consider looking at the subscribe button and reading and listening to the amount of effort that myself and my staff put into the premium service for the Morgan Report.
All right, David Morgan, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for joining us on the Miles Franklin Market Update.
Thank you, Larry.